Theodore Roosevelt once said, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena."
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble.
So that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.
Seize the day.
Whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause.
And I'm gonna stay right here and fight for this lost cause. You've got to get mad.
I mean plumb mad dog mean.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure.
Who at best, if he wins, knows the thrills of high achievement. And if he fails, at least fails while daring greatness.
I'm gonna show you how great I am.
A standout at Stanford, Elway was the most coveted player in the 1983 draft. The Colts had the first pick, but Elway made it known he did not want to play in Baltimore.
I want to give myself the best chance to be the best quarterback that I could, and I looked at that organization and what they were doing, and I didn't think that that was going to give me the best chance to show off my talent. Not show off my talents, but to win a Super Bowl and to win as a football team.
The Colts considered several trade offers before draft day, but would only give up the rights to Elway for a fistful of first-round picks.
He was the best prospect I had ever seen. So if I was going to trade him, it was going to be for the greatest trade in the history of pro football.
When no one met the asking price, the Colts took Elway.
Baltimore selects quarterback John Elway of Stanford.
But that didn't mean their ownership would keep him.
I went down and picked him. When I came back up, they couldn't see me, but I could hear them. They were already talking about, look, we'll just leave here and go do what we want to do. So I knew it was going to be difficult to keep them from trading him.
Within days of the draft, Dan Reeves heard from Broncos owner Edgar Kaiser that the asking price for Elway had dropped.
He said Chris Hinton, and he said Mark Herman, and number one the next year. And, you know, I kept waiting to see what else it was, and he said, and I said, is that it? And he said, yeah, that's it.
The deal was done, with the Colts GM and head coach kept out of the loop.
I didn't find out about the trade until they broke into the NBA playoffs with a press conference. I called Frank Kush, who was the head coach. I said, are you watching the NBA playoffs? He said, no. I said, you better put them on because they just traded your quarterback. So that's how we found out.
Hi, once again, everybody. I'm Ed Berliner, and welcome into another edition of The Man in the Arena. Thanks so much for joining us. A reminder, once again, those of you watching us live on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, that when the show is all said and done, you can also catch it. It will be posted to our YouTube page at welcometothearena.com. Also, don't forget, if you go to edberliner.com and search out Man in the Arena podcasts, the audio podcasts, you can then pick from 9 different platforms where you can download and listen at your heart's content. We make it that easy when it comes down to social media. You simply cannot talk about the career of John Elway without mentioning the trade. The fact that here was a young man who had the New York Yankees who absolutely coveted him, yet so did the Baltimore Colts. And John Elway, the kid, well, a kid, of course, for his age coming out of college at Stanford University, said, I don't think I want to play for the Colts, quite frankly, because I don't think I'm ever going to win with the Colts. It was an absolute bombshell at the time. But it changed the course of John Elway's life, changed the course of the Colts' life, no doubt about it, and the franchise of the Denver Broncos for a guy who has become synonymous with the state of Denver and synonymous with football in Colorado. Quite frankly put, John Elway still remains one of those great stories to always tell in the National Football League, and there's a chance to catch up with more of his stories. Because available on September the 15th, but also available for pre-order right now, is the new book called A Relentless Life. Elway, simply put. The author of this is a gentleman whom I have had the pleasure to work with over the years in South Florida, covering the Miami Dolphins, the National Football League. He is a voter, a selector when it comes to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Hey, look, nobody knows the game better than he. And a Stanford graduate as well. Look at how that all works out. It's a pleasure to welcome Jason Cole into the Man in the Arena. How are you, Jason?
I'm fantastic, Ed. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great, my friend. It's great to catch up with you again and talk about this because the story that is here and the stories that are here regarding John Elway. But it starts out, first of all, to you. Out of all of the players you've covered, and you've written several books before, what is it that drew you, other than being a Stanford grad, as I noted, but what is it that drew you to John Elway as that singular individual that would make a great storyteller?
Well, I mean, there's this incredible life. You talk about the trade. There's 2 chapters in the book just about the trade. And you talk about the championships at the end of his career after waiting for so long. You talk about the return to the arena as an executive. And he's in rarefied air when it comes to that, because there's only 2 people who have won a Super Bowl as a player, made it to the Hall of Fame, and then come back after that kind of career as either an executive or a coach, and then won another Super Bowl, a head coach or a top executive. And that's Elway and Mike Ditka. So he's a very rare individual who's continued to want to compete, where so many other people would say, okay, I put in a Hall of Fame career as a football player, I'm done. I can live off just being this guy, right? But he just kept going, and it's always fascinated me that he's wanted to be like that. And I had, of course, the pleasure of seeing him when I was a freshman in college. He was a sophomore at the time, and I saw him do some spectacular athletic things. And me and my friends were huge Elway fans. So this is a labor of love. It's a 40 years kind of thing in the making. But I've always wanted to tell this story, and I've been working on it for years, and I've talked to 200 people. And now I'm 2 weeks from it, basically hitting the bookshelves and already being out there. So God, I'm so excited right now to get this finally out there after all this time.
All those people you talked to about Elway, you heard negatives, you heard positives, you heard consensus. But I have to imagine that with those who would talk about the negatives of John, they would still say, because I had a chance to meet him and not work with him when I was in Denver for 3 years, but just get a chance to know him and the way people feel about him. They love the guy, but they'll say that he doesn't suffer fools. And there are those who are critical of John Elway at times, but you don't hear anybody being critical in a hateful sense. Many of them, when they come out, it's critical in an envious sense, I get.
I would say that that's probably right. I think that there are people who disagree with him. Okay, you have some philosophical disagreements, but I don't think there's anybody who sits there and says this is a bad guy who's done people wrong. And I'm not trying to say that he's a saint either. Okay, but and I think the picture of him from this, mostly an appreciation, because we're talking about somebody who's achieved at an incredibly high level, and it's a study of how he got there. I think it's a fair portrait of a person who has some rough edges at times. I mean, he did not get along with Dan Reeves. That 10-year marriage ended very poorly. Okay, he didn't always see eye to eye with Mike Shanahan. He didn't always see eye to eye with Peyton Manning during their times. I mean, so there have been moments where he's clashed with people. There's no question about that. And he feels very strongly about his way of doing it. But the one thing, if you are a Denver Broncos fan, and they've won 3 Super Bowls, okay, the common denominator in those 3 Super Bowls is 2 people, John Elway and Pat Bowlen. All right. And if they're going to win any more Super Bowls, in the next few years, that common denominator is going to reduce to John Elway. So the greatness that has come from that team, and that is the greatest achievement by any professional team from the state of Colorado, it all basically emanates out of Elway and his just single-minded push to compete. And so much of that is just about his will and desire to be great. And I loved studying where that will and desire came from.
That feeling that other people have about him, and you mentioned it, the fact that basically, well, with John, many ways, it's his way or the highway. You've always gotten that opinion with him, no matter what he does.
Yeah.
Is the consensus then that this comes from a tremendous amount of egomaniacal arrogance, or the fact that this guy is just so resolutely confident that he doesn't care? He doesn't need anybody else because, well, maybe you take that arrogance and you mix that in with the confidence, and it all comes out, and in the end, it squeezes out to John Elway.
Right, but I see. Here's the thing: egomaniacal people don't listen to other people. Okay, and I would say that that's where John Elway listens to other people, and he wants to hear other people's opinions, and he believes in other people's opinions. He tries to, but when it comes down to making the decision, he's going to tell you, "You look, you hired me for a reason. You hired me to make a decision at the end of the day, and to come up with a plan for this." Just like when I was on the field, look, the coach may be able to call first and second down and determine what kind of strategy we're going to play there. But when it comes down to third down, that's the quarterback's down. And you're asking me to make a play and make a decision or, do something to keep this drive or this game alive and to make it happen. So if you're going to trust him like that, he's going to take on that responsibility. I mean, there's this great story about him playing high school baseball, a high school championship game in Los Angeles, where he's playing against Darryl Strawberry. His team, Darryl Strawberry of Crenshaw High School at the time, and Elway's a senior, Strawberry is a junior. It's this great team from Crenshaw, and Elway hadn't pitched pretty much the entire season because he just, he hadn't had a chance to practice very much because of injury and because of the recruiting and all this other stuff. But in that game, he was called upon to pitch the final 4 innings of that game and to help them win that game, which is this monumental event. He was put in charge. And basically, coach said, look, I'm putting it on your shoulders because you are our best competitor. You are our toughest guy. You are our most talented human being. Go out there and do it. And that's basically been the story of John's life. He's been told, you're the best at this. You're the most knowledgeable. You are the most talented. Go do it. And he has not been afraid to take that on. And he's loved taking that on.
Obviously, and you've learned this, I've learned this as well, covering athletes. The ones who are the greats are the ones who believe that they're the greats at all times. They take the field, they take the court, they take the ice, the track, whatever it is, and they believe they are the best there is at what they do. Hands down, makes no difference. So then let's take that back to the moments of the trade, because here you have the most legendary franchise in professional sports, the New York Yankees, and George Steinbrenner basically fawning over him as being somebody that he sees as being a cornerstone of this franchise for decades to come. And then you have the National Football League sitting there. Elway makes the decision that he's going to go to football. Did he ever at any time really consider baseball, or was that simply just nothing more than a hedge that he could use in all of his discussions? Because as an intelligent man, he certainly knew that he had that backing behind him, and he knew that he had that extra push to go.
Look, I think that Elway's a man of principle. And if he says, look, I'm not going to play for you, and that being Bob Irsay, not Jim Irsay, who's the current owner, but Jim's dad, Bob. And he wasn't going to, and his dad didn't want him to play for Frank Kush, the coach of the Colts, who Jack Elway knew from, their shared experience at the college level. I think if the Colts hadn't have made the trade, Elway doesn't play, and he goes and plays for the Yankees. Now, I don't know how long that lasts. Maybe they wait another year and the draft comes back again. You never know what happened. The 84 draft was certainly a much weaker draft for quarterbacks. He probably goes number 1 again overall. Who knows how that plays out? And I know that he told Gary Hughes, the scout from the New York Yankees, who worked the West Coast at the time, guy who worked for the Florida, now Miami Marlins, as a top executive for them as they were being built. But Gary Hughes was the scout at the time for the Yankees, and he told Gary, well, I could play baseball. I easily could play for him. And Gary basically looked at him and said, you're full of crap. You're going to play football. We all know it. Okay. So I think the presumption was it was going to end up working out that it was going to be football, because basically the Colts were in a situation where they had to make the deal. But if the Colts hadn't have made the deal, if they hadn't have backed out of this, and trust me, there's 2 whole chapters about how this trade unfolded, okay, and it was complicated. If that trade hadn't happened, I do think that Elway would have stood by his guns and said, I'll go play for the Yankees.
Was it mostly John or his father who made that decision?
Oh, it's both. It's really both. I mean, look, Jack did not like Frank Kush at all, because Frank Kush was the anti-Jack Elway. Jack Elway was, he was everybody's, second father, right? He was the guy who took care of everybody. He was, a bit of a jokester. He was, he was serious about his football, but he played it low key. He wanted to create this family kind of atmosphere. And Frank Kush, I mean, everybody knows how he left Arizona State. And for people who aren't historians of the game, I mean, he grabbed his punter and punched his punter when he was at Arizona State, and that's how he lost his job there. And they even tried to cover it up. And Frank Kush was not a good guy in any way, shape, or form. He was the anti-Jack, okay? But the other side is the Colts were a team that was in vast disarray. I mean, Bob Irsay, did not know what he was doing in terms of running that team. He was at war with the city of Baltimore about a new stadium. The team had gone winless in the 1982 season, which is why they had, it was a strike-shortened season, but they'd gone winless. They had traded away Burt Jones. They had
it was a dumpster fire. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was horrific. The Baltimore Colts were horrific, and there's a reason why they moved in 1984 to Indianapolis. Okay, less than a year after all this happened. Okay, so Elway knew, if I'm going to try and win, that's not the organization. That's not the ownership. So in his heart, he knew Baltimore wasn't the right place because of Bob Irsay, and Jack knew because of Frank Kush. So I think this was very much the two of them together going, that ain't going to work. We got to go somewhere else.
You mentioned, of course, that everybody knew this, that he and Dan Reeves did not get along in Denver. They weren't drinking buddies. But as you delved into Elway's, no doubt about that, as you delved into Elway's life and the career, what stories came up? Was there anything during that time in Denver that came up and caught you that became something, one story that you had to pull on a little bit?
Look, if you remember the old show Connections that was on one of those science channels that would explain how things happen and how people end up getting to where they get and all the little different events that have to happen along the way. Well, if you do that, one of the things I like doing was to peel back the layers of, okay, here's John Elway with a really serious, football coach in Dan Reeves. Why did these guys not make it work? And I've done all my research on Elway. I got a pretty good handle on what kind of human being he is, right? Now I got to pull back all these layers on Dan Reeves and understand, okay, what's about him? And Dan is just this incredibly prideful, control freak coach who came out of this classic, Tom Landry, field general, latter-day George Patton kind of character who just believes so strongly in his own will and his own philosophy and everything that he understood about football. And that was just Dan. And Dan didn't modernize in the 80s as the game became more modern, and he couldn't give up control, where you had guys like Bill Walsh who's coming in saying, okay, I'm building this pass offense where I'm giving so much more control to the quarterback. Or you have Don Shula with Dan Marino saying, okay, I know I was a running coach for so long, but I've got this talented passer with these new rules. I'm going to give him more rope. I'm going to give him more control. And what does he do? He throws 48 touchdown passes in his second year, throws another 44. He becomes, sort of the Babe Ruth of passers, right? You have all that going on. Meanwhile, you have Elway sitting there going, I'm running an offense that was written in 1960, by Tom Landry. And it hasn't been modernized and it hasn't been changed. And I've got a coach that if I go to and I ask him, let's modernize this, let's change, he recoils in anger and control rather than listening to me. And that was fascinating to learn about those guys. I mean, there's this funny story about Reeves, about how competitive he was, that he would learn parlor tricks a lot of the time because someone would beat him at a parlor trick, like how to catch a golf ball in the back of his hand. There's this whole story about this in the book. And he would go and he would practice it so maniacally if he got beat that he would practice that overnight, and then he would go back and he would win his money back the next day, right? That was the nature of Dan Reeves. That's how obsessive he was about competing and controlling his own destiny. And that's one of the reasons why these two guys couldn't get along, despite the fact that, look, Elway was doing so many things that were exactly right. Like you talk about drinking buddies, like Elway took the offensive lineman out to drink on, Wednesday and Thursdays. That was, guys' night out during the season, to go throw a few back and become really, really tight, which is why that Denver team, which wasn't overwhelmingly talented, ended up going to 3 Super Bowls during the 1980s because Elway created an incredibly tight-knit group.
With regard then to the way he and Reeves dealt with each other, and everybody learns negatively and positively from everybody that you deal with. If you then take John Elway and let's bring him into his time now as part of the leadership of the Denver Broncos, it does seem as if at times that he is the same single-minded, my way or the highway. He does seem at times to the general public, and he takes the criticism for this, that he's not willing to bend, that he's made poor decisions, that a lot of these decisions come from the fact that he may be arrogant in the fact that he is the one who knows all, tells all, sees all. What's the truth in all that as you bring him forward now into his front office role?
Look, I think that John has thrown himself into understanding how to run a team. I think that he has an ability to pick out talent at specific positions, particularly defenders, because he spent his entire career studying defensive players and how to beat those guys and what makes those guys great. So, he's picked Von Miller and, Chris Harris and traded for Aqib Talib and went and got Bradley Roby and built a great defense that won a Super Bowl and did all these things. I think he also understands salesmanship on free agents. I mean, he's the reason why Peyton Manning ended up with that team, okay? Because he did this, and I've, again, written a whole chapter about this, about how he sold Peyton on playing for the Broncos. And he did it with a very soft pedal approach where everybody else in the league was push hard, push hard, push hard. We got to convince him to come here. Elway sat back and said, look, I understand what you need. I have been in your seat. I am a Hall of Fame quarterback like you who knows how to build a team around you and how to help you. All right? Trust me that I know how to do this. And he did with Peyton. The one thing that Elway suffers, like a lot of other people have suffered, is picking out another quarterback, finding that next guy. And I would say that that's a fair criticism. I think John would say that's a fair criticism, that he hasn't been able to do that. As great a quarterback as he was, he hasn't been able to recognize that in the next group of quarterbacks and find that next guy. Not yet. They're hoping that Drew Lock's going to be that guy. Now, the perceived arrogance stuff, look, it's easy to take shots at Elway. All right. I don't think he's as arrogant as some people want to believe. At the same time, look, you're talking about a Hall of Fame player, won 2 Super Bowls, who also, helped lead a team to a third one. This is not a dummy. This is not a guy who's not qualified. This is not a guy who hasn't put his name on the line. And he has a lot to be confident about. So if he comes off as arrogant once in a while, okay, well, so be it. That's how most people are in that profession. You don't get there without being confident about yourself.
Is that maybe the thing that still digs at him a little bit, is the fact that he is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, without question, and he still seems to have that blind eye somewhere where he can't find that quarterback that isn't necessarily the next John Elway, but is the next really good quarterback to play in Denver, and that's what he's had to deal with all this time. That's got to be maddeningly frustrating.
Well, look, it's frustrating for everybody to try and find quarterbacks. I mean, look, you're down in South Florida, Ed. You've watched what the Dolphins have gone through since Marino, right?
Go ahead and name one since Marino. It's awful tough.
How about name 42 of them? They're just, you just go through it and go through it and go through it, trying to find who is that next guy, right? It's hard. And sometimes you pick the right guy and you don't have the right circumstances for him. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen here. Okay. So I would think any human being would be frustrated at trying to find the next quarterback, but I would also, I would submit, look, he got them Manning. He's the reason Manning was willing to sign with the Broncos, why Manning was convinced that this was the place. And that solved their first 5 years. together and solved what the Broncos were doing. And they built a team that made 2 Super Bowls and made the playoffs every year. That was a great contending team. Now I think he's dealing with what basically 28 franchises deal with, year in and year out, which is, do we have a quarterback who's good enough? And there's only 3 or 4 teams that can sit there and say, yeah, we're cool with where we're at quarterback right now. There's not very many who say, yeah, we're locks, we're solid. Even the Atlanta Falcons, and they've got a very good quarterback in Matt Ryan, who's had a very good career, made a Super Bowl. But I would say that there are probably people in Atlanta who say, oh, we need to find a better guy. And that's just the nature of that position. So, yes, I think he's been very frustrated by it. I think he's tried really hard to do it. I think that there is an inherent frustration that when you are that good, when you are basically the prototype of what a quarterback should look like in terms of arm strength and scrambling ability and size and intelligence and all those things. I mean, Gil Brandt said it to me, 3 or 4 times when we were talking about it. He was at the top of the charts of everything that you could ask for from a quarterback. He's the prototype. Bill Polian called him the statue of David among quarterbacks from that generation. That's what it's supposed to look like. Okay. When you're that guy, everybody expects that you're going to be able to find the next guy. And it's not as easy as you think, because it's the hardest position in sports to play. It's the hardest position in sports to scout, because Tom Brady's a 6th round pick.
I love asking authors who have a chance to interview somebody that they've always wanted to, that becomes the passion project more than anything else, because you knew so much about him. You covered the National Football League for so many years. You went to Stanford. You knew about him. But out of all the people that you interviewed then, what came out of this as something you really didn't know and something that kind of knocked you back a little bit when you learned it and dug into it?
I would say that one of the most fascinating things about this was, we talked about the trade right from the start. And look, at the time that this was happening, you had the Dallas Cowboys were trying to make this trade with, the combination of Tom Landry and Gil Brandt. Okay, 2 Hall of Fame coach/executives. And the president of the team was Tex Schramm at the time. That's 3 Hall of Fame guys running that organization. You had the Oakland Raiders with Al Davis chasing him. Bill Walsh was interested at one point in time. Chuck Knox and the Seattle Seahawks had expressed interest. The San Diego Chargers with Don Coryell almost pulled off the trade until they re-signed Dan Fouts. These are Hall of Fame caliber people, right? Are swimming around chasing this guy, lifetimers, okay? And the guy who pulls off the trade is this guy named Edgar Kaiser, who owned the team at the time, who was in the NFL for 2 years. He bought the team in 1982. He sold the team in 1984. He pulls off one of the greatest trades in the history of the game. It wasn't Dan Reeves. Dan, even talks about it, in the preview that, what you let in with, okay? This is all we have to pay. Everybody in that organization, John Beek, Dan Reeves, Jim Sacamano, the PR guy, every one of them said, Mr. Kaiser, it's wonderful you're trying, but this is a pipe dream. They told him that for months, that this is a pipe dream, because he thought about this during the previous season. Kaiser was looking at, during the middle of 1982 season, when they're going through that strike season, Kaiser's looking, because he's going, well, what would it take for us to get Elway? And everybody's like, well, we can't do it. We just can't do it. We can't do it. But his perseverance, okay, his ability to work relationships and to have a relationship with Bob Irsay and to know how to soft pedal at the right time, how to wait on it, how to be patient with it, is just a study. It's a masterful study in how to pull off what so many people thought was absolutely impossible. Absolutely. Every one of the football people. Again, John Beek, Dan Reeves, Jim Sacamano, all the coaches, everybody in the Denver organization, everybody you're going against around the entire NFL, and some guy who was in the league for 2 years with a general manager who didn't know whether a football was pumped or stuffed, literally. okay, a guy named Hein Paulus, who tells all these great details. These two guys, okay, with Kaiser being the lead guy, those two guys pull off this monumental trade. And I just was fascinated by it. Absolutely and totally fascinated by how they pulled it off. And, there's all this stuff about Elway, and I knew a lot of it, and getting into the depth of his character, talking about his dad, his mom, all these, these great stories about them. But that story about how the trade really, truly unfolded is just absolutely bonkers to me.
Absolutely, without question, one of the greatest players to ever don a uniform in the National Football League, arguably to some, the greatest quarterback ever. And I can tell you that having lived in Denver for almost 4 years, he is Denver. He is Colorado. There may be a baseball team, there may be a hockey team, there may be anything else, but John Elway, you could put him on the side of the mountain overlooking Denver, and no one would flinch, not even the least bit, because he is the heart and soul of that community. And that in itself, every place I went, it was always Elway this, Elway that, Elway this. And nobody, they may have had something negative to say about him, but in the end it was, damn, what a great quarterback. I wish we had him back again. It's just
everybody wants that guy. Yeah.
Oh my God, everybody does. A reminder once again that this is the book to learn about one of the true greats of all time. It is called A Relentless Life, and by the way, it's available September the 15th. However, let's remind everybody that it is now available at Amazon.com for pre-order and at BarnesandNoble.com. And I can't tell you enough, knowing Jason, knowing his penchant for all of the tiny details and the way that he is just a dogged reporter and has been for so many years. When we covered the Dolphins and we had to look at each other and go, my God, some of the things that were happening in this franchise, and we all stayed up with it. We're going, we got to live through this like everybody else, especially in those post-Marino years, was insane, but we had a chance to be there in those. I can tell you that just knowing Jason and his work, this is just going to be a fantastic read. Jason, I cannot thank you enough, my friend. Real luck with the book. Let's make sure we don't have as much time between now and then when we talk again. Let's talk some NFL if and when there's ever a season. If and when we ever get a season. It'd be nice to talk football again. And really, good luck with the book, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that people get out there and pick up a copy of Elway, A Relentless Life. Thanks a lot, my friend.
Thank you very much, Ed. You take care. Enjoy the season.
You do the same, buddy. Jason Cole, again, the book is called Elway, A Relentless Life. It is available for pre-order at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. It is available for wide release coming up on September the 15th. Learn about one of the true greats to ever play the game. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Don't forget, you can catch this show. It'll be posted in its entirety on WelcomeToTheArena.com. Go to all the major podcast platforms, and you can download it and listen to it there as well. I thank Jason Cole. I really hope you go out and pick up a copy of this book because it's going to be a fascinating read. Thanks to Jason. Thanks to our staff. Thanks to everybody. And thanks to you. Until we meet again next time, rock on, true believers. See ya.
This is hard. There's an over-under in the locker room from what I heard last night on how many times I'm going to cry. So I'm trying to bet on the under, but it's been great, and it was tough. It was a tough decision, but it wasn't. And I really don't look at it as retirement. I look at it as graduation. We all graduate from high school. We graduate from college. I'm just graduating from pro football. Any other questions? But it's time. It's time for me to move on. I can't do it physically anymore, and that's really hard for me to say. Ooh.
I only spent 2 minutes up there.
I know it. Are there any other questions? Oh, yeah, the line. I don't know what the line is, but I've lost my bet. I've got all these thank yous, and I'm not going to make it through them. You have any water, Janet? No, I'm kidding. No. Ooh.
Janet came prepared. Yes.
Oh. Thank God for Janet. But from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Denver, because Denver's been great. Colorado's been great to us, to me and my family, and kind of took us under their wing, and it's been, we couldn't have asked for anything better.